think the people that knew Christopher knew that he was extremely dedicated, almost single-minded about his art and teachings and philosophy. And with that in mind, I think I'm not going to talk about that at all. And I would like to talk about him as a man, as a person. I think it's kind of fair to say that I entered his life kind of in the middle. He already had a tangled web of interesting relationships and thoughts that he had been when I entered at 5. I remember in college I would talk about some intellectual figure that I was studying, and he'd be like, "Yeah, that guy owes me $20," and he had kind of an amazing series of adventures with 20th century intellectuals. But my mom came out to the Mesa, and he really became kind of single-minded in that direction as well. He was very dedicated to my mother, and I think initially, at least, sort of accepting if lukewarm towards me. I was I, along with the sick dogs and sick tree that she brought up to the Mesa in the middle of a snowstorm, and I was trying to figure it out with Uncle Sid. I think 1989. I think we were sort of the cost of entry into a relationship with my mom, and but he, he really, I think, came to find a place as a father to me that he never really found for his daughters, which was meaningful to me. He was very very supportive in his way. He was always making sure that I was, that I had the things I needed, that I was, reading interesting things, that I was thinking interesting thoughts. He would, challenge me on the ideas that I was talking about from school or from, other people, and it was. I could always rely on him to have kind of a spark of an alternate viewpoint that I hadn't considered. And so, we formed this very tight family unit for many years. Of course, after my mom passed, I think it was, I think in his mind, he had come to what amounted to the final couple chapters of his life. I think he never really quite knew what to do with himself after my mom passed. And so we had kind of an incredible series of adventures in Central America with Samara and Jesse, who I'm very pleased has been able to join us online. And he came back, and he found some interesting thoughts to express in terms of his paintings, and he wrote a lot after that as well. He had several books that he worked on that I think were very meaningful to him that I'd like to try and do something with. But it was interesting because he kept on coming to a place where he's like, "All right, I'm done. I'm dying. This is it. My ship has sailed." Well, not quite. No, this time for no. It's not. Yeah, we had a really interesting moment with him in hospice, as many of you know, where he, his Crohn's disease had taken a real turn, and he had just an amazing series of abscesses along his intestines, which, as a medical professional, is not really a super survivable situation. And so a very caring and intelligent doctor came to us and told us that this was for sure the end, and he was going to go into hospice, and in 2 days he would die, and then he just kind of kept not doing that. And eventually he failed hospice, and we brought him home. And that, again, I think his the last few years of his life, he was really trying to decide what he wanted to do with that period. Who he was as a person without my mom. And I think he really found some interesting relationships during that period. I think he really was able to generate a new image of himself, especially the last few years where he was living off of the Mesa, and maybe especially when he was living at Camino, the assisted living. He found a number of friends there who he was able to sort of find a new role as a teacher with, I think. Find a new role as a different kind of friend. He'd spent so long finding himself as the hermit on the Mesa who didn't really come and socialize with us normal folks down in the valleys, and kind of a reclusive wizard. And I think finding that moment of relationships with other people was change for him. I was blessed during that period to be able to take care of him pretty a lot, and I really feel that was meaningful for me, given the way that we started. He didn't have to take me in. He didn't have to be my dad. But was. If anyone would like to speak, I would appreciate what story you have. I would appreciate if you use the microphone so we can record.
For those of you who I haven't met, or I have met, but I don't put name to face now. My name's Nancy, and Don and Justin are the significant threesome that Christopher was integral in our lives as Justin and Michael were first growing up together. And in one aspect, probably Christopher's first mentoring of Justin was through the fencing lessons. We had a very eclectic alternative education format that we just, by intention, because Don and I were professional ski instructors, that when you work in the winter time never coincides with the public school system. So that we just thought, okay, well, he's going to be alternative. And it worked. And our focus was just to get Justin and whoever was else in that sphere that Justin would bring in. He would come to us and we'd say, can he or she come home and have supper with us or have a meal with us? And they'd end up staying for a meal, or they'd end up staying for months, or in a couple of cases, a lifelong relationship that's been beautiful. But when it came to fencing, I thought, this is something that Justin is going to be so structured in, because when you have a foil in your hand, you don't mess around. And I think that has a standpoint, Nancy. It's been a blessing to have the two of you interwoven through your lives. And it's been a huge blessing, particularly in the last, for about the 18 months that Christopher was able to spend off the Mesa and within the homestead of the expanding boys, for he and I to have some adventures, whether it was for a day or whether it was over a breakfast or whether it was for a couple days. We did one road trip. He really wanted to get down to a specific part in southern New Mexico, and we we got very close. In fact, we actually drove past that specific part in southern New Mexico, because he and Christopher and I were focused on the horizon line and the mountains. And we drove right past the turn and said, oh, this is the monument you wanted to go see. But he saw it in spirit. And what was integral to everything about his and my last adventures together was the ever presence of Mary. And so they're looking at us and going, oh, they still don't get us. And that's okay. We probably never will. They're unique. As each one of us are unique. And even the youngest ones, you're especially unique. And please, 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 when you get a little tap on the forehead, hey, Mary, it might be Christopher. It might be Michael. It might be Lauren. It might be whoever one of us. But it's going to be them through us on to the next. May we all live.
I would say something quickly as well. As my mom, Nancy, said, I'm Justin. Michael and I grew up alongside each other, out in myself in Canyoncito and him up on the Mesa. But we spent a lot of the formative years together, and Christopher and Mary were a big part of that for me as well. My mom specifically mentioned the fencing lessons, and that's something that's probably my most vivid memory of Christopher in my brain, is this sword master type guy, the warrior poet kind, and I'll always remember him that way. And Michael mentioned that he had a strong view of philosophy and history as well, which he helped impart to me and to friends of mine in this very eclectic education I had growing up. I was actually just talking with some other very good friends last night about my experience of education prior to rejoining a traditional education system during high school, and telling them how grateful I was for the teachers that I had along the way. Even though I didn't go to any kind of accredited program before high school or anything like that, by the time I was ready to rejoin the world and do things the normal way, I'd been prepared for that above and beyond most of my peers at that point. And Christopher and Mary were a huge part of that, And then just on another quick personal note, like, I know we don't hang out anymore, really, which is a shame. We need to do better about that. But Michael, you're still a person very dear to me, and I'll always be around. We will hang out. I'm gonna stop rambling and just say I'm honored to be here, and it was an honor to know Christopher and Mary and Michael and everyone here.
I'm terrified to speak. I'm Josie, and I spent a lot of time with Christopher and Mary and Michael up on the Mesa from the time Michael was 7 until he was 20. I did write down some thoughts. I hope I just didn't delete them. I might have. Oh dear. Yeah. So there's a brilliant poet who recently passed, and their words touched me as I drove here to gather with you all and remember Christopher and celebrate his life, it says, why did no one tell us that to die is to be reincarnated in those we love while we are still alive? And her other sentiment is, dying is the opposite of leaving. Andrea Gibson. Let me find my glasses, that'll help. And I feel like that truth is so clear with the life and the death of Christopher. He's so present for all of us. He was bigger even than the stories he told. To him, numbers were qualities, not quantities. They were descriptors, one of the many he used to weave his magic and his storytelling, and they were very malleable. So you never knew exactly what the thread of reality was, but it was definitely evolving, just like his teachings were always evolving. And my life with Christopher took place up on the Mesa in the House of Symphonies that he had built after a vision, where in the vision he saw every detail of the home. And he told me he felt great compassion for those who have visions. Because it demands surrendering everything. And I can only tell his stories as they were told to me, and we all know his stories were so fluid, and the thread of life he wove is all throughout our lives. He was my one. The one who had the greatest impact on my life and in making me who I am today. And I don't think I can say anymore.
My name's Nina, and I wrote a sonnet in memory of Christopher. It's called Pavan. Pavan was a 16th century compositional form, very slow with 2 beats per measure. Pavan for Christopher Lantz. Junco bird soaring aloft. Pilgrimage. The soul is transformed. The sweet trilling way. The setting. The call of choo. The plumage red as a cardinal's on holy day. Our friendship a steady procession. Children, wives, husband, cadence, duple time. Heavenly planets move in succession. Body falls apart, not to realign. February day, your heart arrested. Desiccated cocoon, a moth unwound from its chamber, drying wings and rested, fluttering towards the moon with no sound. Take note, all ye hearts. See, his signature goes dark as we close the aperture. So I met Christopher about 38 years ago. My husband, David Carson, and I had called a meeting at our home in Arroyo Hondo to start a literary journal called the Taos Review. We put out a call for established artists in northern New Mexico to join us to envision the publication. Walter Chappelle brought Christopher, Bill Gersh, and Bob Saltzman. We became good friends with Christopher and soon visited the House of Symphonies on the Mesa and met his wife, Yvonne. Christopher was a revolutionary, a philosopher, a composer, a painter. He was a visionary, pushed every boundary in contemporary music and expanded the realm of the possible. In considering the personalities who influenced Christopher, I'd like to talk about a few of these. Fred Layton, a Quaker and conscientious objector who was Christopher's stepfather and who gave him a supported home for a while and opened the doors to Manhattan and Mexico for the young boy. Milton Babbitt, considered godfather of electronic music, who took Christopher on as a private student in composition and technique. Christopher met Arnold Schoenberg at Babbitt's New York City apartment, and the Lantz family later hosted Schoenberg at their Palo Alto home, where Christopher was working on his doctorates at Stanford. Heinrich Blücher, who was Christopher's philosophy professor and mentor at Bard College. Blücher was the husband of Hannah Arendt, who Christopher visited with. Blücher was a German philosopher who sought refuge in the US during the war. Christopher remembered laughingly how unyielding Blücher was in his expectation that Christopher read the works of Hegel and Heidegger in the original German. Emily Dickinson, after Christopher was dismissed from hospice, he was rehabilitated by his son Michael and help from Lauren in their home in Albuquerque. He insisted on moving back to the House of Symphonies, where he continued to recover. Every morning at dawn, he'd walk to nearby cliffs and recite a different poem by Emily to the rising sun. Emily and his practice had a deep, transformative effect on him that I witnessed over the years. Christopher gave piano lessons to me and my twin daughters, Maggie and Elizabeth. Mary Michael and Christopher would join us after the meeting on first day for a feast of salmon that my husband rustled up and then lessons. Christopher taught Elizabeth and me a Four Hands by Eric Satie. En plus, and it is my favorite musical collaboration to this day, a very tender memory. I am so grateful to call Christopher my friend.
I do know that there are people joining us from other parts of the world, and if any of them would like to make a statement as well, that the speakers should work just fine for that too.
Sure, I'll speak. This is Dear Woman. Hi. Well, I have been in so many places with Christopher, and I have to say, every instance was the adventure of my life. I was introduced to him in the late 80s, and at that time, he introduced me to the House of Symphonies while he was away from the House of Symphonies. We had met in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And when he started to explain to me what he was doing, I was absolutely intrigued. And instantly we connected and made plans immediately to go out and be at the House of Symphonies. There, I got to explore the crystal bowls, the bowling, and the depth of those symphonies on the wall. And I would have to say, in that instance, it was just absolutely cosmic. I was always a traveling star, but with Christopher, there was no limitations. It was like we could just fly. And our relationship continued, and his improvisational skills was one of the places that we met. I was teaching improvisation at the New College in Sarasota, Florida. And he had come to visit. This was I think the late 90s now. He had come to visit, and there was a grand piano in the dance hall. And I asked him, would you just improv? And sure enough, he did. And it was just over the top. While he was playing improvisationally, I was facilitating improvisational movement and sounding. It was absolutely brilliant. And that was just another kernel of what we shared. We would sit for hours and talk about particle theory, talk about the string theory, and the many people like Nina, I think it was Nina had mentioned, the many people, the artists and that he knew and the stories that he would tell. And then I would say the peak of our experience is we went to Central America by car. Michael and Christopher were in their Subaru. Tamara and I were in a Suzuki 4-wheel drive pulling a teardrop trailer. And we were just going. The plan was to go to, Tamara can probably help me with this, Fuego. What is it, Tamara?
Del Fuego.
Right, at the end of the world. And we never could get past through Colombia because there was such conflict going on. But that journey was just over the top. We went to the pyramids. We went on ferries. We were held up with rifles, 15 and 20 rifles, while we were camping. We didn't know if we were going to make it out safe through Nicaragua. We drove on dirt roads that were practically going to fall off the cliff. And Christopher said, somewhere in the midst of our travels, he said, we're probably going to be the last white people that ever drive through Central America. But it was one adventure after another. It was filled with challenges, but it was such a brilliant experience. And we tucked that one in our belts too. So, and I got to be with Christopher the first time he went to hospice. And I'll never forget, he got thrown out of hospice then too. And he was so mad at me for him not letting him die. He went into a fit over it. And I ended up staying with him because sometimes Christopher would have a fit and it was no big deal. And then we ended up living with Michael and helping him acclimate again. While he was there, I went up to the House of Symphonies and absolutely cleaned it, cleared it, because I knew Christopher really wanted to go back home. And I stayed long enough to help him go back to the House of Symphonies. And after that, I think he had several years. I believe he went back to painting. He had a good role there, right, Michael? He kind of hung in there for a while and did some fun things, and it sounds like he connected with community. But I could go on. And the stories, the music that he shared, the piano playing, and the bowling, the crystal bowling. It was very spiritual, and it affected how I taught. I used a lot of the dynamics that he shared about how we would body up and get ready to bowl. And I integrated that into the improvisational teachings. And so to this day, Christopher is always spoken of in any of the work that I do. So bless his heart, big spirit. Mary too, just absolutely beautiful. And Michael, just love you dearly and appreciate what you've done here and love for all of us. But thank you for the opportunity.
This is Ellen, and I'm currently in New Orleans. I would tell a story of when I was living in Santa Fe, where I still have my house there and plan on going back in a few weeks. But when Mary became ill, it wasn't convenient for them to be living up on the Mesa because Mary was having to go to get chemotherapy and various things and needed to be a place where there was electricity and running water and a warm place to be. And so Christopher and Mary stayed at my house for a number of months. I don't remember how long. And why they were there, Christopher offered to give me piano lessons. And I hadn't had piano lessons since I was about 7 years old. And so I was thrilled to do that. And so Christopher and I went piano shopping and went into a place that had a number of different pianos. I think most of them were used. And we walked in, and Christopher was wearing some kind of paint stained shirt. He'd been out, painting in the studio, and anyway, came in kind of looking like, could have been a bum or something. I don't know, but we went in and or just kind of walking around looking at pianos, and every now and then he would stop at one and just peck at the piano, go boom, 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 boom. And then he would kind of shake his head and move on to another one and kind of fiddle on that one for a second and shake his head and move on. And finally he got to another one and he started banging around a little bit. And he was like thinking, well, maybe. Anyways, so then he kind of started playing a little bit more, and then he sat down, and I was just imagining the people working there looking at like, what is this guy doing? Coming poking at the pianos. And anyway, he sat down and he just started doing a little bit of scales, and then he kind of pushed in, and then pretty soon he was playing some symphonic. I don't even remember what he played, but it was some beautiful symphonic piece on the piano that was just really beautiful. And it ended up being the piano that I bought into my house. And the next several months, Christopher gave me lessons several days a week, and I never got to be a virtuoso or anything, but I really practiced pretty regularly for a while and got to the place where I really, felt comfortable playing the pieces that he'd been teaching me. And then when I got sick about 7 years ago, I left my piano in Santa Fe and been in New Orleans. And a couple of months ago, 2 years ago, I lost much of my sight. I still see some, but everything's very blurry. But I started wondering what I would remember the piano and started thinking, well, maybe I could get just a little keyboard or something that I could practice on and fiddle on. Anyway, a few months ago, a friend of mine went to her sister's and brother-in-law's house, and they were throwing out they had a piano by the door, and she said, what are you doing with this? And they were getting ready to take it to the thrift store and get rid of it. And she said, well, can I bring it to Ellie? So anyway, she brought it to me, and since then it's been sitting on my my dining room table, and I've just been, I'd say playing, like literally play at it, play at it, not play on it, but I not doing performance or anything like that, but I'm having a good time just messing around, and I think about Christopher every time I sit at the piano and play.
Thank you, Ellen.
Hello, it's Val. I'm calling in from Pittsburgh. So glad I can join everyone and hear the comments. And I just say, if there's one word that I always hold for Christopher, which is enthusiasm, on whatever scale it may have been. And to say that he was a universal person, a universal consciousness, or anything like that, way, way too limiting, because his spirit and the way he lived and thought was beyond any description, beyond the universal, to levels and dimensions and everything that are unknown. And that goes down to the small things in life, of how he was so enthusiastic about the small things and everything in between. And I was very fortunate. A friend brought my partner and me to the Mesa for the first time. And we didn't play a symphony that day, but we were introduced. And one thing about it, on the table in the big room, there was this manuscript, a thick manuscript, performance, a field guide to the performances of the 49 symphonies. I always had a wonderful, real affinity for anything having to do with language and publishing and all. And I just wondered, what in the world is this manuscript? Well, I didn't ask anything about that at the time. It was on my mind. And the reason I bring it up is eventually, when the field manual was being published, I had the privilege of illustrating that book and working with Mary and Christopher on the illustration of the book and the publishing of it. And since then, Christopher wrote his what I call a memoir. It's called The House of Symphonies. That's unpublished, and I have had the pleasure of working with him on that, and that's still in the works. So that's been a wonderful association. But I'll tell one story that Mary told me that just a little bit goes down to the daily life of Christopher and his thing, his love of just spontaneous approach to something. They looked out the window and on the mesa, and all of a sudden there was a mother bear and her cub walking past the house. And Mary said, without thinking about it, Christopher ran and grabbed his camera and started taking pictures of the bear, getting between the mother bear and the cub. And Mary was just frantic to get him back to the house. But that spontaneous response to something was very much a part of him. I loved it. That's one of the many things I love about him. So it's been an incredible association with Mary and Christopher and Michael ever since it started. And it never ends for me.
I'm Tamara Lynn, and definitely genuinely moved ever since I first met Christopher. I was fortunate enough to when we spent time together, it was day and night for months. Everything about the moments, whether it was through his painting, his music, his laughter, his knowledge, hiking, eating, it was impactful to me. Every iota of his expression genuinely imprinted every part of my life. And Mikkel too. All the time that we spent together on the journey through Central America was wow, definitely wow. I remember Christopher telling me stories when he was little, and how he was seeing or experiencing normal reality very different. That story of when he ended up in Manhattan and walking through the streets and seeing, hearing and seeing the geometric shapes as color, and I was just like, I can so relate to you. I get who you are, and so honored to have been in the sphere and continue to be in the sphere of that beautiful human being. I didn't have a chance to know your mama. Um, I did meet the tree and heard amazing stories, and just wow. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Michael. Yeah.
Would anyone else like to make any more statements?
May I? Hello everyone. My name's Andrew. Mary was my dad's sister. And I, well, I think above all, I feel that I wish I had gotten to spend more time with Christopher. I think over the course of my life, we were, we were able to be together perhaps, between 5 and 10 times. But I nonetheless felt a very, a somewhat transspatial connection with him, and felt really deeply understood by him as a person. I remember one of my earliest memories with him is when we went to spread Mary's ashes at the Mesa. And just at some point after the ceremony, to wake up in the house, and he took me with to go bring up the sun. He said, and I was probably like, I'm not sure, in my teens at this point, but he said, yeah, you want to do it just to make sure you're still alive, because you can't always be sure. And later on, I don't know, and so it's hard. I suppose it's hard to put into words the way that Christopher made me feel, but I always felt very like deeply perceived for who I am, in a way that is very hard to come by. It was a really special thing, special gift to receive from him, and I'll always treasure, the memories of the few times we were able to spend together. Thank you.
The former sound guy I should know. Oops. Hi everybody, I'm James. My cousins, Stephen. When I was a kid, my grandma would take us on summer vacation trips. And some of my earliest memories take place on the Mesa in the House of Symphonies. It was one of the more common places we would go, and one of the places that we would look forward to most for many reasons. I only ever knew the family unit, like Mary, Christopher, and they're just wonderful people, gracious, right, and having suddenly two additional youths running around, causing certain chaos, particularly youths that are not used to the wilderness, and who perhaps needed to be kept from running into cactuses or stepping on snakes or whatever. But regardless of all of that, Christopher always made me feel welcome and helped me to internalize a respect for nature, something that is not the same where I live. And the stories, the encounters, the moments out in the desert have stayed with me. And as an adult and now a parent, seeing the time that Christopher would take for me, whether it was show me something on the piano for an hour or two, right, was an incredible gift. Very glad to have had Christopher in my life. Thank you.
Hi all. I'm Sid. I am Mary's brother, James' father, and Stephen's father. I have a little different perspective of Christopher because my connection with my sister Mary predated him, and so he sort of abruptly appeared into our lives, much to the surprise and initially the chagrin of my mother, who accompanied these young men to the Mesa. So clearly, by the time they were making their walkabouts to New Mexico with my mom, she had reconciled to the fact that she was never going to get her daughter back, really, and Christopher had her, body and spirit, on the Mesa. So initially, I met Christopher through the stories that she would tell me, which arguably made him bigger than life and bigger than maybe even the stories that he told about himself. But she also conveyed the depth of his character and spirit, the quality of human being that he was, to sort of adapt. Val said the characterization of him being a universal spirit sort of didn't do him justice, but the truth is he was incredibly flexible in how he dealt with people. I was probably the sole Republican in the family, and I'm a technology guy, so relating to him on an artistic level was a little bit of a challenge for me. He tried to teach me on Horowitz piano for Elise, and I think, bless his heart, he was incredibly patient with me, but I think he gave up on me at some point. But what he taught me there on that piano has definitely stuck with me. little bit maybe like your story, Ellen. But Christopher was an amazing individual, and certainly I wasn't part of his early life, as many of you were, but he has nonetheless had a significant impact on us. First in stealing my sister away to the mountain, and then my youngest son. Clearly, the impact transitioned to him, and so now he's in the desert, and we're not. But that's okay. I loved him immensely, even though I struggled often to understand him. And I knew him primarily through my sister's inexorable commitment to him and her love for the man that he is. So here's to you, Christopher.
Hi, I'm Stephen, the third of the cousins. And as my dad mentioned, Christopher managed to steal me away to the desert too. I just wanted to say that like I am a profoundly different person than I otherwise would have been had it not been for his influence on my life. His welcoming embrace to my brother and I, the many times we came out to visit, opening his home to us, profoundly changed me as a person. He taught me a love and appreciation for nature and for the desert and for music that I take with me every day. And all of the relationships, the home that I have now, I wouldn't have those if it wasn't for his influence on my life. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
I just wanted to say how incredibly grateful that I am to share this moment with everybody because I knew Christopher for probably about 15 years, but I didn't really know him at the same time. I feel like when I met Christopher, I was living with Michael and Lauren, and I was a profoundly silly 20-year-old who had no patience for or capacity for really deep thinking. And I think that one of the first moments that I remember, because Christopher came to live in the house that we were all sharing, was being so impatient with storytelling. And he was a fantastic storyteller. And I remember the first time that I just sat and actually listened for a moment and got to see. I honestly don't remember which story it was that he told in that moment, but I got to see the unfolding and how he had woven it together by the end. And as a young person, I thought, man, waiting for a good story is so incredibly worth it. And I took that little nugget with me, and I grew in patience over time. And I very much loved his stories and loved speaking with him all of the time. And I even kind of think about how I use that in my own life. And I teach language arts to middle schoolers, and I talk about stories and I talk about how they're structured. And he was a master at that. And I'm just thankful for that and I'm thankful for all the stories that you guys have told, because it really fulfills and rounds out a person who I think I only really got to see a little tiny sliver of in the time I knew him. And I'm always going to wish that there's more, but just thank you guys for sharing. Oh, sorry, my name is Cipriana, just a longtime friend of Michael Lauren's.
Hi, I'm Andrew, another longtime friend of Mike and Lawrence, and kind of building on that Cipriana said, I came into his life pretty late. I met Mike in like 2006. So, feels like he had lived a whole life, before then. And Christopher, I think, is the closest that I will ever get to meeting a real life wizard. Like, for real. I can't remember what the exact quote is, but like at a certain level of technology, it just feels like magic. And I feel like that's the case with knowledge. And a lot of times you would talk to Christopher and it would seem like magic, his breadth of knowledge in certain places. And I really felt that with his art. And the first time I ever went to the House of Symphonies, I was just blown away by how incredible it was, in a way that I couldn't comprehend. So it really did feel like magic. Yeah, I mean, he clearly touched everybody very deeply with that, and he will live on in all of us. He was a good man, and he raised a very good man.
I'm going to preface this with saying that I'm not great at public speaking, never have been. So I'm mostly going to kind of go based off some notes that I had originally written about Christopher. My name is Lauren. I'm Michael's wife. And I originally met Christopher, obviously, through Michael. I've known Christopher for about 15 years, going on, would have been 16. I, as Sabri and Andrew have said, I wish I would have known him longer because I knew Christopher during one of the most difficult points in his life. His chronic pain was at some of its worst. He was constantly in and out of hospitals. He had some strife with his daughters, and it was just moving off the Mesa and living with us off and on. It was a really hard time for Christopher. So I feel like I didn't really get to know who he was fully as a person because of that, because I only saw this portion of his life when it was its hardest, like I said. But even with that, he made a profound impact on me, especially through his storytelling. I did the same thing with Cypri, where I was, where I'd be like, oh, I've heard this story before, like I know this story now. But at the same, and there was always, we'd always joke how they're like, how much truth is in this story? How, like, well, those details were different the last time you told me, but, it's, I could have sworn you said that it was a coyote last time, not a, magical, elk demon, but, that's okay. That's okay. But it didn't matter whether there was truth in those stories because they were so elaborate and beautiful and compelling. The point of storytelling is sometimes less about all the perfect details and more about the emotion and the feeling that it gives you. And Christopher was a true master of that. He, like, through his art, through his storytelling, through his writing, he was an incredible person, and I am truly grateful that I was able to, even in the time that I was with him, get to be there for him and help him through those moments. I think one of the things that I remember the most was when Michael and I helped him to get his false eye. And he was so adamant about wanting to make sure it was the Western Hemisphere. And I remember we had no idea how we were going to do that. that we were going to make sure it happened because that's what Christopher wanted. And we have the photo of the eye. And it just, I think that is kind of a perfect symbol of like who he was. Just, he was so unique. There was never going to be anyone like Christopher ever. And I'm grateful that I got to know him. And I could say more, but I would keep going forever. So I just want to say that I loved Christopher. He was wonderful and kind to me. And we didn't always like understand each other perfectly, but he was really an amazing person, and I was glad to be there for him, even in those last moments.
Not to closure, because there'll never be closure on Michael and Christopher's life. But it was probably 10 days ago, I pulled into a gas station here in Santa Fe, and somebody was filling up his tank, and it looked like a vehicle that could go some places, and we got to chatting. And getting to the point of the eye, he said, oh, he and his wife were heading out in 2 days to go to Tierra Fuego, driving. I said, oh, if you have a few minutes, let me tell you a story about an eye. which took this reasonably, anyway, it took him aback, but he was open to hearing about the story about an eye. And having been part of that saga of the eye and getting the imaging and, you know, how it all, anyway, stay on point, Nancy. Christopher's dedication to making sure that wherever he was in front of someone from that point on, of having that eye, particularly if they were in Latin America or traveling through Latin America, that they could orient themselves to where they might be on the globe. Because of the fact that when you were on that story, on that trip, all his maps were continually being taken away. Because the people that you were encountering, as I remember Christopher telling me the story, is they weren't so much interested in what provisions or food or money that you might have. They wanted your maps because they never knew what was on the other side of the hill they were in the valley. And so Christopher and his eye and that wonderful globe of North and South America, people can always orient themselves. And we're not polarized. We're just orbiting in different spheres. That's all. Where is the eye?
It got burned with it. Yeah, it got burned. But there's a great picture of it right there. Yeah, yeah. It I was there for a lot of the saga of the eye. That was a kind of an interesting microcosm of his life, I think. He he got an infection in his eye and he needed to have a false one put in. And so we went to this brilliant, dedicated man who has an office over in on kind of the east side of Albuquerque, and his specialty, he's really an artist. He's a very interesting man, but his specialty is he takes very detailed pictures of people's eyes who need false eyes, and he paints a incredible rendition of their eye in full color that matches the other eyes so that people can have eyes that look the same. And so I was, it had taken some time to get to this appointment, and I was really excited for Christopher to go do that. And so we went in, And the guy started taking his pictures and talking to Christopher, and Christopher was like, "No, I don't want another eye. What's the point of that? That's no. What I want is the Western Hemisphere. Can you paint the Western Hemisphere for me?" And you could see this guy really, from the question that he had just been asked, you want they in your what do you want me to do? So I had to really think about that one for a minute. And so he said, "Well, I don't know if I can do that for you, but if you can get an image printed, I suppose I could make the eye for you." And the real challenge there was that, of course, it had to be printed on a very special material that would then go into the false eye, which it was itself made of very special material, such that it would work. And so I had to call, I think, about a dozen companies before I could find somebody who would actually do this for me. And I repeated that conversation a few times, where the person on the other end of the line with the company said, "So you want me to print the Western Hemisphere, and you're going to put it in somebody? Are you going to glue it? What do you like? How do you want to? What's going to be there? What do you want?" But we got it done, and I brought some. It was I think a special kind of latex that would go into this special resin that the eye was made out of, and they got it printed, and so yeah, everywhere he went, he would kind of like give you this like interesting look with his eye, and like really pop it open and be like, "There you are, you're right there in the Western Hemisphere," which often took a little explanation in its own right. Yeah, but of course it sparked a story of him going through Latin America, which he was really one of the formative moments of his life. But he loved talking about that. he had a blast with it. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing these memories with me. And we have recorded this, so I will make sure that everyone has an opportunity to download this session if they'd like. For people who are physically present, there's going to be food and refreshments out, and of course there's quite a bit of his art to look through. I'm realizing in this moment that I did forget to bring his book, which well, the first one, the Field Manual to the Performances of 49 Symphonies. But I do have that, so anyone who'd like to borrow it and take a look, I would be very happy.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear woman. Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be here together.